When I was in eighth grade, I met a friend named Brandon, and me and Brandon were tight. We were close. We were good friends. But there were a few things that were different about me and Brandon. First of all, Brandon was really athletic. He was a good-looking kid. He was tall. He got good grades. Like, he was one of those kids. I had to work for my grades, like work for him. For Brandon, grades just came naturally. He made like all the sports teams he tried out for. He was popular. He knew a lot of people. Like, girls liked to hang out with him. He had this ease about talking to other people. Also, this really bugged me too. Brandon's family had a lot of money, and so whatever he wanted, he got. You know, when the N64 came out, he had it. When the starter jackets came out, he had them. He had everything. His family was just they had money, and whatever he wanted, again, he got. And there was something about Brandon, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was more about me, because every time I went over his house, you know, I saw everything that he had, and I wanted what he had. I wanted his games. I wanted his friends. I wanted the magazines he subscribed to. I wanted the shoes he wore. I wanted the clothes he had. He had a pool. So everything about Brandon was like, even though we were great friends, sometimes I found myself, when I was around Brandon, feeling really frustrated at him for what he had. I would feel like resentment towards him because of the things that he had. And for Brandon, life just came like easy for him. You know, friends and school and sports, athletics, popularity, everything just came easy to him. But for me, it felt like nothing really came easy. You know, what I figured out was that I was dealing with a lot of jealousy towards Brandon. Even though we were great friends, jealousy was something that was starting in middle school, and I would have to deal with for the rest of my life. It's a battle that I still fight today. See, sometimes jealousy, it can lead us to a place where we feel agitated or bitter towards somebody, and sometimes it can make us feel a certain way towards somebody that we don't want to feel, and we don't really know what to do with that feeling. And sometimes jealousy, it creeps into our lives, and we're not sure what to do with it, but we know we want to feel a different way, but we're not really sure how to. But we all know that when we start to feel jealous towards someone, it affects our relationship with them, and it affects our relationships with ourselves. And so there's people in your life that you know they're better looking than you are. They have more friends than you do. Their bank account is bigger. They got a nicer car. They got a nicer phone. They have the video games you want. They play on the team that you wanted to. Everything about them is just like better in your eyes. And sometimes it's deeper than that. Sometimes you realize in life that sometimes people, their families are together. Sometimes they don't get in as much trouble. Sometimes it's like they have this ease about the way they go through life, that whatever they want, they get. They can talk to people easily. They're popular in school. Sometimes like they know exactly what they want out of life, where they're going, where they're headed, their next thing. They know exactly what they're going to do. But for you, it's like, man, I don't even know. And that makes you jealous of them in some way, somehow. It's like things aren't good with them and things aren't good with you, and you really can't put your finger on it. And the whole thing is, like, we know that jealousy has an effect on our lives. And so what are we supposed to do about that? You can't just wave like a magic wand and say, okay, jealousy, go away. Like, it doesn't work like that. Dealing with jealousy is a hard thing, and it's something that all of us have to deal with from time to time. But if we're not careful, jealousy can take over our lives and make our lives something that we don't want them to be. You see, one reason that I love the Bible is that the Bible deals with issues, and it tells stories of real people who dealt with real issues, the same kind of issues that you and I deal with today. And there's this story in the Bible about this king named Saul, you may have heard of, back in the Old Testament. And Saul is this guy who deals with a lot of jealousy. And we're going to find out how Saul dealt with his jealousy and what he didn't do well. And I hope that we'll read this story of Saul and see that jealousy can destroy us from the inside, can lead us to make some bad decisions, But because we see Saul's bad decisions, hopefully you and I can make better decisions for our future so that we don't fall into the traps that Saul fell into. So you're going to find Saul's story in 2 Samuel chapter 7. And we're going to start reading chapter 17. And we're going to start reading a story that if you've hung around church for any amount of time, you know this story. You've read this story. This is the story of David and Goliath. Now I'm going to skip around a little bit. But again, this is 2 Samuel chapter 17. It says, Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Sukkah in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Damim between Sukkah and Ezekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle lines to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. Now, this is a classic battle scene. You've seen a movie where there's a battle. There are two opposing armies against each other. Saul is the king of the Israelites, and there's this Philistine army. The Israelites always had problems with the Philistines. Like they were their number one enemies. They just went back and forth like all the time. Now again, Saul's the king. He's supposed to ride out and destroy the Philistines. No questions asked, like it's over. That's just the way they handle it. But there's some more to this story. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. Now, back in the day, sometimes armies wouldn't fight. Sometimes they would pick one champion from one side and one champion from the other side, and that champion would be the representative of their particular army. And those two champions, they would battle it out. And whichever champion won, well, that army would win. Everybody else would go home defeated or victorious. That's the way it worked. Well, back then in this battle, Saul wouldn't fight Goliath. And you know why Saul wouldn't fight Goliath. Because Goliath was over 9 feet tall. He was a giant. He was huge. Nobody would fight Goliath. Nobody wanted to fight Goliath because he was huge. And so Saul's kind of stuck in this predicament. Well, what do I do? Where do I go? What do I turn to next? And so every day, Saul would ask for someone to go and fight Goliath until one day, a champion from the Israelite army showed up. And his name was David. So this guy David said to Saul in verse 32, Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy, and he has been fighting men from his youth. So Saul is kind of worried about his friend David. He's met David before, and he's worried about David. He's like, David, there's no way that you can fight Goliath. Goliath is 9 feet tall. You're just a little kid. You're going to go out there, and you're just going to get your butt handed to you. There's no way. This fight's going to last 2 seconds. It's not going to work. And so basically Saul is saying, David, it's crazy. Thanks for trying, but no thanks. You can't take care of Goliath. You can't do it. But eventually David does talk Saul into letting him go and fight Goliath. And maybe you've heard this story. We're going to pick up the story in chapter 18. And it says, As the Philistine moved close to attack him, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. Killed him with one stone. And as you can imagine, David became an instant hero to the Israelite people. But his story didn't end on the battlefield. King Saul promoted David because he was so heroic. He was a leader, and he was so proud of him. And because of David's courage, David was promoted. Saul, in chapter 18, it says, Whatever Saul sent him to do, David did it so successfully that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the people and Saul's officers. And so David, he is making a name for himself. He is the man. Whatever David did, whatever Saul asked David to do, David delivered on that stuff. But it kind of turns bad for Saul. In verse 7 of chapter 18, the people start to celebrate David, and they start to sing this song that if you heard this song would probably make you angry. It says, as they danced, as the people danced and celebrated David, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. And so the people, they dance, and they quite literally, they celebrate David and praise him as greater than their king Saul. And you can probably imagine how this goes over with Saul. Like, put yourself in his shoes. How do you think he felt about everyone loving David and dancing and singing this song? Well, look at Saul's reaction. It's really not hard to imagine. It says, Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Kept a jealous eye on David. And see, as the people continued to praise David for his heroic efforts, they began to view him as greater than Saul. And so it's almost like the people turned on Saul. They saw how much they really liked David. Saul saw how much the people really liked David. And that's it. That's when jealousy really, really set in for King Saul. This is verse 15. It says, when Saul saw how successful he was afraid of David. So Saul could have been happy for David. He could have been happy that this hero defeated Goliath. He could have been happy that David was such a great warrior. He could have been happy that David was such an incredible leader, but he wasn't. Because Saul was so jealous of David. In fact, he eventually plotted to kill David and spent a large majority of the rest of his life chasing after David in hopes of killing David. See, which is crazy because Saul was the one who recognized David's leadership skills and his passion and promoted him to the high position that he was. And so what changed? I imagine and I think that the author of this proverb that we're about to read gives us great insight to what happened to Saul and David. He gives us great insight to what jealousy can actually do to you and I. It's the same thing that happened between me and Brandon. It's the same thing that happened between Saul and David. Look, Proverbs chapter 14, verse 30 says this, a heart of peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. A heart of peace gives life to the body, but a heart of envy rots the bones. See, if we're not careful, we can find ourselves in the same position as King Saul. We'll discover ourselves like jealousy of a friend can rot, destroy, and ruin us. Jealousy can destroy that friendship. Jealousy can cause us to doubt our own talents, achievements, and successes. Jealousy can rot how we feel about ourselves. Jealousy can kill our sense of peace. Now, here's a really fun fact that we can't not talk about. Do you know who wrote that Proverbs? A lot of people believe that Solomon wrote Proverbs. Do you know who Solomon's dad was? Solomon's dad was David. And I bet you that every chance David got, David told Solomon the story of Saul, whose jealousy destroyed him, whose jealousy destroyed their friendship, whose jealousy rotted his bones, whose jealousy drove him to so much that it destroyed Saul himself. And see, if we aren't careful, that gut feeling of jealousy has the potential to not only ruin our relationships with others, but also to ruin the way we feel about ourselves. So I think we all get it. Jealousy, it doesn't just hurt the other person. In fact, it barely hurts the other person. Jealousy most often hurts us. But what are we supposed to do about it? You can't just decide to not feel something, right? Like you can't just decide to not feel hungry. Anybody ever try that? Like, come on, let's just not feel angry that we can't go to Busch Gardens. Like, just try it. You can't do that. But there is something that you can do. And if you want to fight against jealousy, there is something that you can do. Something that all this research and brain science and neuroscience says can actually help us as we try to fight the effects of jealousy. Here it is. See, we can celebrate others because the more that I celebrate others, the more I like myself. The more I celebrate others, the more I like myself. See, let's try this. Have you ever felt scared or intimidated or nervous or anxious? You know how you feel? Like, How you feel when you're anxious or you're just scared to do something? Don't you know, like your body kind of like, you cower, you try to get small, you hunch over, you cower down, you try to make yourself small, like unseen. That happens when you're afraid. But science tells us that when you're afraid, when you're anxious, when you're apprehensive, when you're scared to do something, if you would sit up straight or stand up straight, put your chest out, you stand like Wonder Woman would, those feelings of anxiety and fear and stress, they'll actually go away. See, you can trick your body, you can trick your mind into feeling brave and courageous and strong just by the way that you stand, just by the way that you hold yourself. See, you trick your brain into feeling something it doesn't really want to feel. And see, celebrating others works the same way. It shouldn't work the same way, but it does. See, you can trick your brain into feeling less jealous and less envious the more you celebrate other people. And guess what happens when you feel less jealous and less envious? You start to become more loving and more compassionate. You start to become the kind of person that Jesus wants you to be. See, here are a few great ways to put this into practice. Number one, you start with yourself. Look at your own life and determine what's worth celebrating. What are you good at? What do you have to be thankful for today? What's good in your life right now? Those might seem like really silly questions to ask or practices to participate in, but trust me, write them down. Maybe every single day, challenge yourself before you get out of bed. Think of 2, 3 things that you're really, really thankful for that day. What can you celebrate about yourself? I promise you it will help. Number one, start with yourself. Number two, move towards the person you're jealous of. This is crazy. But when you feel that tug towards jealousy, ask yourself what you can celebrate about the person you are jealous of. What are they good at? What things make you feel thankful for them? Write those things down too. See, if I would have done that when I was friends with Brandon, our friendship would have been so much different. If I would have just said, hey, Brandon, thank you for inviting me over and letting me swim in your pool instead of, man, I'm so angry and so jealous of your pool, that would have made our friendship totally and completely different. See, this may be difficult at first. It may seem pointless, but if you can stick with it and stay committed to the process, you'll be amazed at how it changes how you see yourself and how you see the people that you're jealous of. See, spend some time praying and asking for God's help and changing your heart towards you and towards them. See, I want to remind you that God isn't mad at you if you're jealous or if you're envious. He understands we all come wired with a tendency towards jealousy. He also knows how much it can hurt you and your relationships, which is why he wants us to be free from jealousy. See, jealousy will rot your relationships and rot your peace. But the more you celebrate others, the more you like yourself. The more you celebrate others, the more you will like yourself. So who do you need to celebrate today? Who is it in your life that you need to celebrate? And so you can begin to brainstorm ideas for how to celebrate others in a group of people, with your family, or on your own. And you can begin the immediate work of celebrating the people you are jealous of, and in turn, experiencing more freedom in your relationships with yourself and with others. So I want to keep this conversation rolling. And I want you to think about a couple questions that I'm going to ask you to help us fight jealousy, celebrate others, and like ourselves more. Number one, how have you seen jealousy affect the way people treat others? How have you seen jealousy affect the way people treat others? Number two, what area of your life do you struggle with comparing yourself to others? What area of your life do you struggle with comparing yourself to others? And number three, how would celebrating others change your perspective of them and yourself? How would celebrating others change your perspective of them and yourself?